2 p.m. in Barcelona. So hello and welcome to our Computational Design in Landscape Architecture webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Carla Sologuren and I'm part of the McNeil Europe team. Today we have landscape architects, we have urban planners, constructors, students, teachers. And if you're new to Rhino, I will suggest, if you're new to Rhino for landscape design, I will invite you to visit our website, Rhino for Landscape. And here you'll find all the tools, plugins, resources, and also tutorials to get started with Rhino for landscape design. I'll go back to my initial presentation, and I don't want to make it long. I'm here today with Thomas Chapman. He's a senior landscape architect, longtime Rhino and Grasshopper user, also teacher. And I found his Grasshopper script some time ago, and I'm happy to see how his open source project has not only grown, but also all this dedication is enhancing the capabilities of landscape architects. He's a great example of how Rhino can be used as a development platform. And without further ado, Thomas, I think I can stop sharing my screen and we can start with your presentation.
Thanks, Carla. I'll just share my screen. Is that coming through okay?
Perfect. We see your screen and we hear you quite well. Also, if you have like any question, I'll be gathering all of them. So just post that on the chat and at the end we'll have like a Q&A. Okay, thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Carla. Before I start this presentation, I would like to just do an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of this land on which this presentation takes place. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. As Carla mentioned, my name's Thomas Chapman. I'm a senior landscape architect, national CAD manager, and computational designer at Realm Studios, which is a landscape architectural studio in Australia. I also do some sessional teaching at RMIT, teaching Rhino and Grasshopper. I have a passion for programming and especially programming centered around landscape architecture because there's a big gap for landscape architectural centered tools within the industry. So I learned programming and here we are today. This presentation is going to be an introduction to two projects that I've done professionally at Realm Studios. And then at the end, I'm going to do sort of a live demo of LandArch Tools, which is, as Carla mentioned, open source free add-on that you can install on Rhino. I use it every day, and it just really kind of bridges the gap of, enabling better design within Rhino. So starting off, I want to preface all of this that I have a very particular approach to computational design. And that's always thinking about how designing the algorithm, how the algorithm works is always human-centric. And what I kind of mean by that is that I always have control over the outcome. I never really create code that just creates forms. It's always sort of there to augment my design. So this kind of avoids, that rigidity and sterile perfection that you can sometimes get with computational design. So I hope I can demonstrate that today. So this is the first project, which is UTAS Greenspine. This is a project we did for the University of Tasmania. This was a car park that used to be a historic railway yard, and before that, a wetland. So you might guess what is parametric about this landscape. It's fairly obvious, which is paving. So the paving here is really what we wanted to do was tell a story of these different time periods, right? So the first is this idea of this wetland that would flood. And our studio is really into kind of storytelling with water and how we deal with drainage. So this landscape includes a lot of these. If you look, there's these kind of darker points within the landscape of paving. This kind of correlates to the areas of drainage. So these are all soaks within the landscape. For some reason, sorry. The other thing you might see is that there's these lines, these white lines within the floor. These are speaking to the railway lines, the historical marks of those railway lines that no longer exist there, but we're trying to reveal through the paving. As well as you might not see it in this rendered view, but we're also doing building footprints on this paving, right? So the question is, like, how do you achieve this? You could definitely achieve this doing it by hand, but layering all these kind of storytelling elements is pretty hard by hand, and also kind of making iterations and changes is also very difficult if you're doing it by hand. So the technique I really like to use is image sampling. So this kind of starts to demonstrate my technique with computational design. It's that rather than creating a algorithm with like attractors or something like that, where you do have control, but it's not like I don't know, it's quite mathematical, right? I like to put the human element into these kind of designs. So the way I work is through image sampling. So in Photoshop, I paint these layers of storytelling, basically. So you have these black lines, which are the historic railway lines. You have these darker patches here, which are the building footprints. And layered with that, you have, textural elements as well as the soak elements as well. So that gets transported into Grasshopper, and Grasshopper translates that into a paving pattern. So this enables you to work incredibly fast. Like you're literally painting paving, which I find quite satisfying. So I guess this is the script that does all of that. If you've not used Grasshopper before, this might look a bit intimidating, but when you start to break it down, it's quite simple. So I'll do that. So this is the bone structure. So the bone structure is sort of the thing that you always start your scripts with. It is sort of like the fundamental building block before all complexity is put into the script. And I think this will make more sense as I go through. So the bone structure for this particular script is a little hard to conceptualize, but it starts with a surface in Rhino. That surface you apply a texture to, which is that bitmap that we saw before, which is that bitmap on the left. And that's scaled to the right size of your model, right? So that you get the right scale, because the JPEG doesn't have any intrinsic scale of itself. And the second bone structure is a boundary. So this determines where paving is kept and where paving is trimmed. So we have a set area of paving that we want within that surface area, and this boundary determines that. So in Rhino, that looks something like this. So again, you have this flat surface with the texture applied to it, scaled to the right size, and you have a boundary determining which areas are paved and which aren't. So the second block of logic is the image sampling. So what this does is it goes through the bitmap, and for every paver that you've defined, it shoots a little sample. I think of it as like a little laser light that comes down and like samples the bitmap, and it gives you a value, like a lightness value, between 0 and 1. So that's the reason this image is black and white, because it's just looking at values between like 0, which might be white, and black, which might be 1. So that goes through and assigns each paver a value. So that can then be applied to sort of a paver list logic, which, you know, so you have a list of pavers now which have this value assigned to them. So this paver has a value of 0.9, which is the lightness value taken from the bitmap. And that gets ported into a bunch of logic, which basically asks, this might look a bit intimidating, but it's, if you just like read it like English, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, if x, this being x, is larger than 0.5 and x is smaller than or equal to 1, then c equals x. So that would mean that x gets put into a list called list C. X gets put into list C. So you can kind of understand how you can sort your pavers into different paving types using this kind of logic and this image sampling. So the result is this. So you can see that you get this really nice blending of storytelling within your paving pattern, which would be very hard to do by hand, right? Especially those building footprints which continue that underlying pattern, but modified to be a different color. It's like, that's quite awesome. And the way that the train lines are kind of dithered and anti-aliased onto the paving is really neat as well. So this is something this is an approach that you really only get with image sampling, and I think it's really like the designer has full control in this, and it's a real good example of how an algorithm can augment you as a designer rather than it kind of controlling you as the designer. You might notice that there's also like boundary pavers here. That was actually a requirement for DDA access, to have contrasting pavers on the edges. DDA in Australia is the Disability Discrimination Act. So that's stuff like having tactile pavers, having ramps, you know, accessibility stuff. So that was kind of interesting to apply that in this method as well. So the last two blocks is just custom colors and bake onto layers. So this is kind of just additional code to make doing revisions easier. So this number 4 will apply custom preview colors to those pavers just so that you can see them better. And then this code here just bakes them onto certain layers so that I can export them easier. So hopefully that made all sense. But the way I really like to think about Grasshopper scripts is that it's like a river system, right? You start with like rain, little droplets of rain, really simple objects. Those raindrops coalesce and form a river. Maybe there's a waterfall somewhere at the end here, and then at the very end, you get an ocean, which is your like product. So you're really going from low to high complexity, always left to right, like a book. That's sort of how I visualize it anyway. So that paving was exported into AutoCAD. We went through a lot of kind of ideas and theories about how the guys would actually pave this on site. We had all this kind of ideas of making logic of repeatable patterns in these kind of underlying texture here. But in the end, the guys, they just printed out the A0s and went through line by line and paved it on site, which was pretty amazing. Only a little bit of complaining, but I think they enjoyed it really. So the project's currently being constructed. So these images are a little bit scruffy around the edges, just because it's still got construction guys doing it. But you can start to see in this image that you have that underlying texture. You have this kind of DDA compliance of these kind of contrasting pavers showing the edge. Here you can really see the soaks and that translation of that, you know, initial Photoshop file to actual build project, which I think is pretty cool. Here again, you can see the soaks. You can see tire marks because again it's being constructed still, it's fresh off the line. And here I think this is really cool. You can just see these outlines here of a change in patterning, and that's the building footprints that I showed before, which I think is really, really cool. It's really subtle. It's something you're not going to see unless you kind of know about it, which is, it's like an Easter egg in the landscape. The only kind of unfortunate thing is the train line lines sort of fell off because, well, they're there, but they're very subtle. But again, that's, you know, that's the life of landscape architect. Things kind of translate differently from concept to reality. I thought I'd put this last one in because this was quite cool. This was a detail that we didn't actually show in the paving design, and in fact is something that the guys installing this did by themselves. This kind of logic of having these darker contrasted pavers along the edge, and we thought it was great. They kind of took initiative and really aligned to what we were trying to do. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat scratching at the door.
Don't worry, we don't hear it.
Okay, great.
But this is fun.
So this is a drone video, and again, a little bit rough around the edges because it's still being constructed, but if we pause this video, you can see how close that is to the original concept of the Photoshop file. So it's really like a one-to-one translation. Again, it's all about this kind of structure. Of this kind of ability to keep control with your algorithm, which I think is really cool. So this is the second project, which is Mindani Balak. This is a project we did for Victoria Uni, again, another university project for the Indigenous Academic Unit, Mindani Balak. So this is going to be a new heart for Victoria Uni. And really, it's a sort of reaction against the architecture that this cavernous area that this landscape lives in. So you might notice there's a lot of organic shapes. We've completely removed any hard landscaping. It's all, you know, it's all permeable. It's all like natural materials. We are revealing the drainage and using it as overland flow. So you might have seen at the start of this video some water running underneath the bridge. And we've also got some, you might think, why do we have so much decking? It's because we have a lot, again, DDA access issues because this is a very steep site. So the aim for this was really to return the landscape to what it you know, to its original natural state in a way, and any structure that we apply to to this landscape is raised, and we allow the planting within this thing to grow through and up and above and with this structure. So it's this kind of idea of touching down lightly onto the landscape. There's actually a lot of computational design that's gone into this. It was a very complicated project, especially with this bridge, but I'm going to be focusing on this planter that lives on the facade of the building here. So this is the script I wrote for those planters. There's two of them. There's a Western planter and an Eastern planter, and for sake of simplicity for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the Eastern planter. So the first requirement for this planter was to create a NURB surface for the manufacturer to actually create these CNC molds for a fiberglass structure, right? They specialize in these kind of organic shapes. So going through again, you might find this repetitive, but it's honestly pretty much the same for every Grasshopper script. First, you start with a bone structure. And in this case, the planter consists of only 4 polylines. There's no fillets to these polylines, so they're really easy to edit. Those polylines get imported into Grasshopper, and they apply some fillets to these polylines. And then there's some additional logic that just looks for perpendicular lines on the V direction, what I'm calling V direction here. And when you combine those two, you get something called a UV curve network. And depending on your experience with Rhino, you might already guess that that creates a NURB surface. So this is just a demonstration of how I pretty much design everything now. This, for me, kind of has replaced sketching, partly because I can't draw, but also because how fast and intuitive this becomes to edit and create form in 3D space. This, for me, is epitome of speed and good iterative design. So this is really the process of how these forms were designed. So you can see the real benefit of having a really simple bone structure. It's that to make advanced edits to this NURB surface, it's really just a case of shifting things around. So this kind of satisfies the issue of manufacturing. The guys that we're working with can just take this and get their CNC molds made. But we wanted to take it a little bit further and give agency to Mindani Balak. And in more kind of, in a way that they could lay their mark on it to make it theirs, because it is their space to begin with, right? So they have a indigenous artist called Dr. Paula Bella. She works at Mindani Balak as an academic, and she did a lot of the branding for Mindani Balak. So we got her on board, and my thinking for this was that I wanted her to be able to draw as she normally does, without any restriction on what she can and can't do, and just give her basically templates in the right aspect ratio that she could draw on, and those would be applied one-to-one onto the planter. And I think this is really powerful because it really minimizes the amount of separation between her and the outcome, without her necessarily having the requisite skills to create a 3D model, right? And this is really important for this because, you know, each stroke and pattern has significant meaning. And it's really not my place to kind of modify or change that. So I really wanted her to have that kind of that control. What this also meant was that she could just pump out a huge amount of these sketches. Like we went through a lot of exploration, and it was only over 2 days, but the amount of work we got done was actually really exceptional. And what it really allowed us to do was understand what did and didn't work for these planters. And I think it's going to be a really great outcome. Unfortunately, it's still cooking, basically. We're progressing it now, and hopefully it should be constructed by the end of the year. So if you follow me on Instagram, I'll probably post some pictures once it's done. So it's pretty cool. And the last thing I just wanted to quickly go over for this project for Mindani Bark is the grading that I do for pretty much all my projects. I have this script in Grasshopper, which allows me to do this interactive fast and loose grading. If you're interested in playing around with this, it's free on my website. It's just a Grasshopper script. It does require a whole lot of add-ons though. So I think I show which add-ons you need, but yeah, it is a lot of add-ons to get this working. But what this really lets me do is grade creatively. A lot of grading software is very engineering, which is great, but it's very restrictive. So you can't do like silly things. So this really kind of gets me in the ballpark of what needs to happen on a site, and I can do it quickly and loosely. And then, get a qualified engineer to look at it at the end of the day, which needs to happen anyway. So yeah, if you want to have a play around with that, that's on my website. Really, it's just a boundary curve with lines and points to denote point heights and lines of heights. And here I'm just showing some water simulation, so you can kind of get, that's pretty good for diagramming to show clients and things like how the landscape's going to work. And you can see that we have this river overland flow that we're integrating into the landscape rather than just putting it all into the drainage, which is the usual thing. So yeah, that's the live the kind of slideshow portion of this presentation. And if Carla's happy for me to continue, I'll continue on to a demo.
Sure. Maybe it's a good time just to ask something. When did you start with this project, with these tools?
I think it was about 2 years ago. It was with the pandemic.
During the pandemic, yes.
Yeah. So
it's
with a lack
new.
of things. Yeah. So, Melbourne was one of the most locked down cities in the world, apparently. So yeah, it was kind of a reaction from that, finding something to do. So I just learned, I learned Python, and then started just documenting issues, or just like things that seemed like they were repetitive and easy for a computer to do, and just started writing those problems down, and then just went through the list and started coding them up. Initially very roughly and badly coded, but since then gone back through and
so probably
really,
this is the first time that you show this tools because so far you've been using it for your own projects, right?
Yeah, so myself and and Realm Studios use it.
Okay.
There are, I hear through the grapevine, there are some other studios using it in Australia as well. Nice. But yeah, it's good. It's this first time kind of showing it, I guess.
Perfect. So if you want, you can continue. I thought that it was a good time just to ask that question before we move to something else.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing. And I'm going to share again. And is that coming through okay?
We don't see it yet. We see a gray screen. It might take a few seconds.
Resume share. Nope. Okay. Hang on 1 second.
Sure. Don't worry.
Okay, I'll just put that up there.
Now we see it.
Okay.
Now we see your Rhino screen.
Great. So this is Rhino 7. These are my tools up here, LandArch Tools. So it's just a set of tools to, if you're a landscape architect, these will probably be pretty familiar, why you would need them. So I'm just going to go through each one. Hopefully I don't bore you to death, but I think, when you're working within landscape architecture, these are highly essential. So the very first one is calculate grade. So what this will do is if you click on it, it'll ask you for 2 points. So you click, and it will calculate the grade of any of those 2 points. Obviously, this is fantastic for understanding landscape models. If you've got a tin or just like some kind of survey, having the ability to quickly just click between 2 points and understand the grade is big. Moving on, the next one is find RL, so RL's relative level. So this would just find the Z height, basically, is what it's looking at. There's ways you can do this within Rhino, obviously, but this is just a faster way to kind of tag your model with RL levels. The other thing it does, which I find really useful, is it actually copies that value to your clipboard. So if you're kind of doing grading or want to check a survey, you can click a point in your 3D model and then copy that value to AutoCAD or Vectorworks or whatever you use to document. Calculate height does what it says on the tin, which is this guy here. Obviously, you can do this in Rhino using distance. The only different thing is that what it'll let you do is calculate the height, the Z height between any 2 points. It doesn't matter if it's here or here. The Z height will always be just straight up. So that's the difference between this and the distance level. Distance command in Rhino. The other thing is that it also copies that value to your clipboard as well. This guy is moved to RL. So if you have like a box or an object or like a wall, usually it's a wall that you need to move to a certain RL, you can use this tool here. It'll ask you to select an object, hit enter. It'll ask you to select a point. So that point will be the RL that gets, or the point that gets to moved to a certain point. So if I put in 10, and if we test that, you can see that that object has been moved to RL 10. So this is really useful for if you have an engineer who specified a wall at a certain height. That's a really quick way to get it shifted into the right level. Grade curve is a recent one that I've done. This one's my personal favorite. So the reason for that is it's really hard to find a graded or to work out a graded smooth curve. without kind of destroying it. So what I mean by that, if I just click on this and grade it to 20, you can see that this curve has nice kind of Bezier curves here. And then if you look at the graded version, those Bezier curves are intact and non-destroyed. And this is at 1 in 20, which if you've ever tried to create a curved ramp in Rhino at a certain grade, you'll understand how amazing that is. Many hours wasted trying to create graded curves. You can use it the same with different types of curves and just basic curves. It does the same thing, and it does this without destroying the line, like adding multiple points to it or whatever. It keeps the original. Next one is random rotate block. So this will only, so this is really good if you use like programs like Enscape or I can't think of any others, V-Ray, which have plant models included with them. You might find when you do renders that they're all located, they're all they look kind of robotic because they're all facing the same direction. This tool just randomizes like bunches of blocks. So if you have multiple blocks, you see how they're all facing the same direction. If you highlight all of them and press that, it just rotates them along a z-axis to make them look a bit more natural. This guy here is also the same thing, basically, except it shifts them up and down at random heights. So that again is just adding kind of naturalistic elements to your model. The next tool is scatter block. This one is new as well and probably needs a bit more work because actually scattering things onto a surface turns out to be a very hard problem. Especially if you don't have a maths degree. But at the moment, it works pretty well. If you click it, it'll ask to select the surface to scatter on, and then to select the block to scatter. Press enter, probably won't do 20, 100 will do 20, and we'll do like 2 scaling. And then when you hit enter, it will randomly scatter onto this thing. So you can see the method that this uses to scatter is truly random. So truly random means that there are going to be holes in the scattering. Again, this kind of alludes to the rabbit hole that is scattering things onto a surface. So that one is going to be worked on in the future to add different scattering methods to have like even distribution. The next one is face camera. So if you ever use kind of picture frames in Rhino just for like backgrounds, you might have come up against the problem of having to rotate these picture frames manually for each render that you do. But I've got a tool here, which if you click, it snaps them to the current camera location. So if we zoom around again and hit that guy, you can see they'll snap back to the camera location. So that's just really if you're rendering stuff, if you've got picture frames of people, I guess you can snap them to the camera. There's this there's this guy that I created literally for one issue. I had a model where I had just a huge amount of these picture frames to illustrate a forest, and I needed to kind of cull all the picture frames that weren't in the current render view. So what this does is anything that's not in the current viewport gets hidden or deleted. So if I just select everything and change it from delete to hide and hit that, you see anything that wasn't in that viewport is now hidden So that's a very, I don't know when people would need to use that, but it's there anyway. This one is really useful, is just drop objects to surface. So if you highlight these guys and then click this and then click your surface, it just drops them automatically to the surface of the, to the surface. And I think this uses the block insertion point as the place that it places onto the surface. This one's a little bit weird. Project curves to 10. So if you use Rhino, you probably know that there exists already a project. So if I project these, you can see a curve's been made. But if you look, you might notice that there's lots of control points that have been created. That's not super helpful when you're, want to preserve the control points on your original curve. So that's what this does. Basically, it projects that curve onto your surface, but it doesn't add any additional resolution to that curve. So it's just, you can see that's being projected, and the curves are the only things that have been projected. So yeah, again, situational. DDA ramps, this is really only useful if you live in Australia, unfortunately. That's this guy here, draw Oz DDA standard ramps. This will just ask you for insertion point, and it comes up with a menu of different ramp standards. And what it does is it draws a ramp to the max length and minimum width that's described by the DDA standards. So this is a really quick way of not having to look through pages and pages of standards to understand what you can and can't do in a landscape. Again, only relevant for Australians. This next guy is a way to get a quick understanding of your tree soil requirements. So when you click this button here, you can see in the top left, it says the root ball in liters. The default's 400, so I'll just hit enter. Enter the soil depth required, available, sorry. So 0.8 is like the usual minimum soil depth. Enter the mature tree height. So you can enter this, but it can guess if not. So the default is 5 meters. Oh, sorry, that was for this option, which is enter the DBH, which is diameter at breast height, I believe. If you don't know that, it can calculate what the standard is for that. And then it'll finally ask you to pick a point. So this, what this does is it just generates your tree at maturity, which and the height and the canopy of it, but more importantly, the soil volume requirement for that tree to hit that specific height. And if you go into wireframe view, you can see that it describes the root ball height. It describes the diameter of the root ball and the soil volume requirement, which is 10 meters cubed. I'll go through the next ones pretty quickly. This is multi-patch. All that does is multi-patches instead of the default one kind of will try and patch all of these into one thing. This one is good for like road markings or things that you want to kind of patch individually. The next one is multi-offset, same idea. You can do that. No, I think I have to enter a distance, so I'll just do 1 meter. 1 meter. Yeah, okay, too big, so you can see it's glitched there, but you get the idea. And then I have a few tools for just layer control. So if you guys have used AutoCAD, you'll know of the kind of isolate layer tool in AutoCAD. That does the same thing. It hides all the other layers and just shows the layer that you selected or the object on the layer that you selected. And then to unisolate, you can just click that and it brings them all back. This guy will just turn off a layer, an object on a layer that turn off the object that correlates to a layer, if that makes sense. This guy here will select all objects on a certain layer, which you can do through Rhino, I believe, but this is just a quicker way of doing it. This guy here will turn off, will lock all objects besides the object layer that you've clicked. So this is really great if you have hugely complex landscape things and you just need to quickly isolate to edit something. These two buttons are probably not necessary, but I've put them in because I'm always just popping between plan and perspective as a landscape architect is my two go-to things. So they're just there to make that switch really fast. This tool here is, well, it says import and locate scale maps from near maps, but you can import anything, any geolocated JPEG. So if we just click on that, here I have the .jgw file, double click on that, and then the associate JPEG file. So you won't see anything, but if we go zoom, extents, and then try and find it in world coordinates, zoom selected, here we are. So what it does is it locates this, this plan in world coordinates. It scales it to the right size. And this is sort of invaluable if you use services like near maps. So I'll just Control Z out of that. And go back here. The next tool is just get coordinates. So if you're working in world coordinates, you can use this just to quickly get an idea of where you are in the world. And then if you are struggling to work in world coordinates because most CAD programs can't handle world coordinates, if you click this guy, what this does is it shifts everything to the 0, 0 and makes a record of the original world coordinate location. And what this lets you do is restore it to world coordinates at any time. So that's super handy. Amount of projects I've been on where a model has been moved back to the origin and no one knows where the origin came from is too many times. So now you can always keep a record of it. And the very last tool, thank you for keeping along with me, is create standard layers. So what this does is when you click it, it creates a bunch of standard layers that I typically use within a model. And it also kind of randomizes the colors so that there is some variation within the color schemes of this model. And yeah, that's the LandArch Tools plugin. Hopefully that all made sense. That can be downloaded. Probably the easiest way is to type in package manager. And this little window will come up. If you type in LandArch, it'll be this little thing here, and you just click install. And that's it. Just reboot Rhino, and you'll have the tools. So pretty simple. It's all free. It's all open source. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Thomas. Really, it's been amazing, and thank you for showing us all these tools. There's a lot of work behind all of this, And actually, I got some a couple of questions, and one of those is it possible to have LandArch tools in Rhino 5, or it's just for Rhino 7? I just want to let you know that the package manager is only in Rhino 7. So that's also something to mention in case you're working with previous versions. You can download from Food for Rhino, but I want to be sure. Have you given it a try on Rhino 5?
Yeah, so no, not personally.
Okay.
There's nothing stopping you from downloading and installing it. I'm definitely using some of some APIs that I'm pretty sure were only introduced in Rhino 7.
Yeah.
So some things may work, some things may not, and it could crash your program. So don't use it if you're in a professional project with a deadline.
Okay.
I can only guarantee it for Rhino 7 because that's sort of what I use and develop on.
Exactly. Also, because you mentioned that this was your project during quarantine during the pandemic, so it's quite recent. And then I was asked if it's coded in Python, right?
Yeah, it's all in Python.
Okay, because someone asked in the chat if it was using the Grasshopper player, and the Grasshopper player it's a tool that is in Rhino 7 also, but it's for people that don't know Grasshopper quite well, and they can actually go through a definition without having to actually know and understand more about Grasshopper. So
yeah, it's a native Rhino plugin, so it's all coded for Rhino without the need for Grasshopper.
Yeah, great. So there's people saying thank you. It's been amazing, really informative. They're very useful tools to apply in practices. I wonder if we have a script for cut and fill calculations at some point in the future. Do you want to add this tool to your set?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely cut and fill for sure. I'm working on Grasshopper add-ons at the moment when I eventually get time, which I showed you before, that kind of grading script I did. So that's a huge script at the moment, but I'm going to consolidate that all into a single Python module. So yeah, there'll definitely be further down the road. Hopefully cut and fill. Yeah.
And there are some tutorials also on your website if they need to go back to how they work. So they're really short and really good. What else? I was unable to find the grading script you mentioned on your website. Are you able to guide me to where it is?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just share my screen.
I thought it was yeah.
So can you see my screen okay?
I actually see your camera. We're looking at you, but we don't see your screen.
Oh, share. Yep. Okay, so this is my website, landarchtools.com. So if you just go into download and scroll past all the changes, it's this guy here, LandArch Tools for Grasshopper. So this is just one big old Grasshopper definition or file. So if you just download this, you can drag and drop it in Grasshopper. It'll probably yell at you to add on a boatload of add-ons, but if you just go through the list, it'll work. Yeah.
Good. Then we have a little more questions. Also, if they want to contact you or if they want to follow your work, you mentioned that you have like an Instagram. Is it your personal Instagram or is it LandArch Tools? Where can we find you? Where can we follow your work?
My Instagram is LandArch Tools.
Okay.
So if you search LandArch Tools, you'll find my Instagram. It's public, it's not private or anything. To contact me, information's on my website, landarchtools.com. The email is info@landarchtools.com.
Great. I'll add this also
Yeah.
to the description of the video because the session is being recorded and I will later upload it to our YouTube channel. So you can watch it again in case you joined a little bit later and you missed the first part. You can go through the presentation. So people are saying on the chat, thanks, Thomas. It's super handy. Then Vlad is asking, is it possible to rotate trees according to camera in real time?
Oh yeah.
Soon to come. No.
Yeah, that's a difficult problem because then you need the program running continuously in a loop in the background. I think I probably can only do that using C++, which is probably too difficult for me. So no, at the moment it's just it's a boring script that you just run. I'd suggest like putting all your picture frames in a single layer, and then every time you change the camera, just select layer and then run the script, and it'll snap them all to the camera. Yeah, but yeah, it would be better if they followed the camera for sure.
Yeah. Well, then they're asking, what tools are you excited to make in the future? Do you have something in mind?
Yeah, well, what I mentioned before about the Grasshopper scripts, I have a lot of just like messy code hanging around that I need to kind of organize into nice little packages. So yeah, that's sort of my next endeavor is a Grasshopper plugin to add to the Rhino plugin. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks. Great presentation, great, wonderful tools will make life easier. Just one unrelated question. What font did you use in the presentation? And actually, I love the whole design of your website and the presentation.
Thank you.
So
let me just double check for you. It is a font called Visby Round, CF.
Visby Round. Okay.
Visby Round.
And I do have a question. I just remember. So what do you use for the animations? This kind of walkthrough animations.
Yeah, that's Enscape. So that's what we use at our office to visualize. We find it has a really low barrier to entry, which is great because I don't have to teach anyone how to use it. You just kind of turn it on and it looks great. Yeah. So yeah.
Good to know. Are there any tools to draw a specific graded pathway on a landform? Do you have any tools to draw a specific graded pathway on a landform?
Oh, directly onto like a tin. Yeah, that's a good idea and not something I've done. So I usually have a base survey, which I then kind of like cut out and like cut a hole into and then reconstruct using that interactive grading thing. And then any kind of ramps that need to be applied or any kind of like stuff like that, I use the graded curve and just plonk it on top. But yeah, so a more integrated system, that's a good idea for the future for sure.
Great. Then Pat asks, where are the original world coordinates saved when using the tool?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll show you because if you delete them, then you're kind of out of luck. Yeah, so what the script does is it creates a layer called origin, which is locked. So don't delete this. The data is actually this. So long as this exists in the file in this layer, you can always restore it back to world coordinates. So yeah, that's a really good question.
Good. Great. Then, well, they say, thank you for the script. Looks great. That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing, Thomas. You're the star. I love it. Thanks, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We love your work. And I believe we all do.
But yeah, I mean, if it can save some people some time, that's pretty much the spirit of this project. Yeah, just save time.
Yeah, I guess if it becomes repetitive, you kind of
Yeah,
appreciate
exactly.
it.
These are like boring things to do in landscape, you know. You want to spend more time designing
Creative,
than
yeah.
doing grading or finding levels or whatever, you know. So.
And then any suggestions of where to start with Python?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, I started with Grasshopper, which is a super great way if you're a visual person, a visual learner, or you know, a designer. You're probably a visual learner or something equivalent to it. I would start with Grasshopper because it really gives you a good understanding of data structures and data flow and understanding how to manipulate data, which is what programming is. I went from Grasshopper into Python. There's a free book called How to Automate the Boring Things with Python. The first half is really great. The second half is more targeted towards a like office worker using Excel. So I suggest reading like the first half. I know Rhino also have Python specific courses that you can
Yeah, we
do,
do.
which probably will be more useful than trying to cobble together different resources, which is what I did. And the sort of last piece of advice is like, don't just try and learn Python in a void. Have like a project that you want to create and keep it really simple. You know, the trick is to get those endorphins going to when you've created something with code. Is that's what gets you hooked and gets you committing things to memory so that you can do more cool stuff. So yeah, that's my advice.
Sure. And I think just well, you've already mentioned that you started like the plugin back in 2020, I guess like 2 years
Yep.
ago. Yeah. And then someone asked if you have been using Rhino, I guess Rhino inside Revit, this add-on that you can download, and if you have like a Revit license, you can actually.
Yeah. At the moment, we don't really use Revit a lot in our office, just because we've found Revit sort of not super. I mean, it's the same issue with like every CAD package. It's not super landscape focused. It's a very architecturally focused program. So we don't use it too much. So that's not something I've really played too much around with, but definitely in the future, it's probably going to be inevitable as the industry moves towards Revit and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So I guess that's all for today. Again, thank you so much, Thomas, for preparing this presentation, doing the demo, and accepting my invitation to run this
No
webinar.
worries. Thank you for having
It's
me.
super late for you,
Yeah,
but
11 o'clock over here in
exactly.
Melbourne.
Yeah, I wanted to do this while you were in Edinburgh,
Yeah.
but well, we'll find another
Uh,
time, and for sure we'll stay in touch. So thank you all for attending the webinar, and hope to see you super soon. We're running these webinars almost every week. Thanks again. Have a nice afternoon, evening, night, and see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.